Well, so I guess for me, I thought I wanted to be a physician. Probably because my parents were forced me to do that, right, in college. But then went off on my own and decided to try a PhD program because it was a full ride. They paid for your research stipend. I just wanted to be independent. But over time, I realized you're not really working with humans. You're not working with people. And so that's when I decided, okay, on my own, I want to get into medical school and actually do the doctor thing. So that's something that goes back quite some time because back then I was like, oh, maybe epidemiology, oh, maybe basic science research, but it was nowhere near the gratification for being helping people and being with people.
Right. So what made you? So it was kind of like you were raised as like that's what you wanted to do to kind of show to your parents, or what was your like first experience with maybe a nurse that led you to want to do that? Do you have anything formative like in your early days?
No, actually, I didn't. Well, I mean, I did but it wouldn't have been in the way that one thinks. So I was little, and my only memories of really utilizing healthcare was actually my uncle was a pediatrician, so he would give all of our shots. So that was at least comforting. But then, at one time I jumped off in a bank off the sofa, and then had to, of course, be swaddled and held down while they got my stitches in my eyebrow. So I was a typical little kid, a trauma patient in the ER, right? But no, I don't think I had any formative experiences that really shaped that I definitely wanted to become a physician. I think it really was, just because my parents pushed me towards that, because it's a stereotypical Asian parent thing. But then I had to find it on my own terms, right? So I think at the end of the day, no matter what ends up happening there, they ended up being right. But I had to go find my way, which was a master's in pharmacology along the way, doing bench research, discovering other ways of being. And then even when I went to medical school, I thought I wanted to become a surgeon, but ended up choosing emergency medicine because it covered all specialties. It covered everything. It was a generalist. Um, and went into emergency medicine. But then, of course, as soon as I went to emergency medicine residency, I fell in love with something else, which was critical care, which was you know, obviously the intensive care unit is a whole different rhythm with the medical and surgical patients. And the rest, I suppose, is history.
Wow, yeah, that's amazing. I think like it's such a journey to go from like an environment where because I grew up like this too, where school is like always so encouraged. And I grew up with a sister who is 1 year older than me. She was the valedictorian of our class, like the perfect person, and I was always trying to aspire to be like that. And it's also like a Midwestern sort of country environment where there's not a whole lot to do aside from school, and excelling in school is really encouraged. I think, and this kind of is off tangent, but in terms of the way modern education is, like it is almost the contradictory to entrepreneurship. And I had to unlearn a lot of the stuff that's enforced in higher ed, like things like a very clear path. Like if you get these good grades, then you can like a clear curriculum, you know what you need to do. And a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times hard work and, rote memorization, and you can see the path. It's a lot clearer. Whereas in entrepreneurship, it's like it's like the total opposite. It's like nobody's telling you what to do, and you kind of have to check in on yourself, which kind of speaks to the value of community, which we'll talk a lot about too. But when you first, so you were a physician for like 9 years? How long?
20 years now. So
20 years? Oh
yeah,
God.
I'm 20 years in. I'm still actually practicing. I still practice critical
Okay.
care medicine. And I gave up emergency medicine a couple years like into the pandemic. I started sort of when I started the coaching business. So for me, when I
Okay.
wanted to, the pandemic brought lots of changes and a lot of like pausing and existential crisis, I think, in many people's lives. And obviously, when you're dealing with the virus head on, you have your own personal version of that. And so in that space, a
Yeah.
lot of things sort of evaporated, like my typical teaching things or academic things or national leadership things. And you're just kind of hanging out with just life became very simple in the pandemic where you just take care of the person in front of you and that's it. And it stretched on for so many years, as we all know. And so with all of
Yeah.
that, I wondered what else was out there. And in that process, I was going through a lot of changes myself. So I was going through a divorce. My mom got sick. And you start to realize I was in a frontier place where I wasn't sure where to go. And enlisted the help of a professional coach for myself. And in that process, discovered that the coaching is really this magical place. You as a business owner probably have had business coaching or entrepreneurial coaches and CEO coaches. And, so when things are unknown and frontier, you do need someone to help you tap into yourself, to know yourself, to be able to make the right decision. And that we all, as professional coaches, believe that people have the answers inside them. Is really just about uncovering it with the right powerful questions at the right time and see the things that someone can't see for themselves. And how people get there. So I went back to coaching school, found my coaches in our company, and here we are a couple years later.
Yeah, dude, that's amazing. The question I was going to ask is because that's what you do now. It's a huge part of your community, your business now is, I want to talk about that coaching experience that you had and what maybe you learned about that. Like, what was it like being coached for the first time, and what was Lillian like before versus Lillian after?
It's really funny. A lot, you realize that you may be 40 some years old and you don't know yourself. I think that was like, I think that probably the scariest thing. You're like, wait, you asked me a simple question. I actually literally don't even know who I am. So I think just doing the work to uncover and see that the story and the thread is there. So I think it's also interesting that you went all the way back to like, in high school, like how my story began. But the story and the threads are there, because back then I wanted to be an author. Right. And I was much more creative. And, there are little threads of that, but that had all evaporated by the time, 2021 happened when I went back to coaching school in the middle of the pandemic. Now I get to have all of these things. And so even though there may be some parts that seem very linear, I feel like linear and curvilinear lives can also coexist simultaneously. And nurturing both of those is probably more important than we realize. Just so that people can think about the fact that there are benefits for doing things linearly and strategically. And there's also benefits for taking a different meandering sort of organic kind of pathway in the process of either work or learning or career paths.
Yeah, dude, career. That's literally what I was about to say is career path. Like so many people, and I was a victim of this myself too, because I went to school for professional golf management, which 18 universities in the country offer. And this is one of those things too, where part of it was the environment I was raised in, and part of it is just when you're that age, you don't know better. And the diabolical thing is that when we look back at ourselves, we don't give ourselves credit for not knowing. It's just like right, wrong. It's a very binary view of our past, and it can lead to self judgment, which is usually not a great emotion. But I think so many people fall into that trap of I wasted all this time, not that phrase directly, but something to the tune of if I had started doing this way earlier, or I wasted so much time in this area. I felt that with entrepreneurship too. Like I was lucky enough to start relatively early in my 20s, but I just think like from age, 8 to like 16, even like into college, it was all out. It was all on a golf course,
Mm,
practicing, drilling, repping. And I think, man, outside of what real takeaways are there from an entrepreneurship? And I had to like really learn, like, okay, I learned interpersonal communication skills that are valuable. I learned, how to deal with pressure. Like when people are watching you play golf, I've definitely been on the failure side of playing bad when people are watching. So you learn to, cope with failure. You learn to show up. You learn hard work. You learn all these things. But no one really gives themselves credit to that when it seems on the outside that they're doing something totally different. Um,
right.
to your thread on that, what are some of the things that you take away now that you are a coach, or some of the things that you took away from being in, a physician in house that you use to help your clients now with the coaching side?
Well, so I think there are a couple things. I mean, one thing I would say probably from the coaching side of things. So I trained at the interprofessional professional. I'm blanking. I'm like blathering. Sorry.
There
The
you go.
Interprofessional Center for Excellence in Coaching, IPEC. And one thing we always say at IPEC is uh, everyone is both your student and your teacher. And so the reality is that is always happening all the time, whether we realize it or not. And so that's probably my one big takeaway from there. And I think, in terms of my work in uh, education, simulation, and being a physician, because so much of my identity of being a physician is actually being a teacher of physicians, and being a program director and creating environments where people can learn, grow, and develop and play as part of their growth journey. is that there are a lot of parallels both in the coaching and in my clinical practice, primarily because it's really about humans developing and getting to the place where they feel comfortable performing the activities that they need to do to be able to work with patients, families, from a technical perspective, procedural perspective, and also communication perspective. So I do think there's a lot of overlap in general, and I would say probably the biggest takeaways is just acknowledging those meta small reflection pieces that you can do every single day and every single week, whether you're doing it for productivity purposes or you're just doing it for learning purposes, are really important.
Yeah. I think like it's so hard to it's the closest you can get is like small moments of self-awareness throughout the day that you like consciously remind yourself of. And that
Right.
may sound overly holistic. I'm not the most I've done meditation a lot. I've really looked into this, especially the last couple of years when businesses, increased my I would say like baseline stress levels. I really started looking into this stuff. But I try and find like a few minutes throughout the day where I'm just like pause and just feel what you're feeling and acknowledge that you're only going to be living in this moment once, and then try and like carry that out. And but it does take like that conscious trigger or people around you reminding you to take that moment and see the things in yourself that you just can't appreciate while you're living it.
Yeah.
There's
It's
so
really
much value
hard.
in that.
What you're talking about is really a great skill. I mean, mindfulness and gratitude is one of the few evidence-based practices that do help with burnout and do improve resilience. And yet, so many people in healthcare push back against it, primarily because it's something that you can do on your own and it's a me problem rather than it's a system problem. And the reality is, I think no matter how you look at it, business, industries, everything else around the pace of everything, it's a choice on how you want to engage with it. And the system's not going to change anywhere near as fast as you want. So I think having some way to make sure you're grounded in who you are and knowing where you are and just be able to notice refreshes you so that you can actually do your job better, whether that you're a physician, a nurse, a marketer, a business person, a finance person, like just taking a second, like you're commenting on, it's not only good for your mental health, but also helps your creative side of things
Yeah,
too.
100%. Something you touched on there. You mentioned burnout. Um, Is that something? There's a lot of different words for that. But burnout's a very popular one. But in the like the healthcare leaders that are in your community or the people that you speak to and it is kind of a stereotype from the outside, but is burnout or something related to it? Is that pretty common within people in healthcare leaders, especially?
It really is, yes. I would say before the statistics before the pandemic was that it was about 60% or more. So that's like 2 out of 3 people have some kind of burnout going on. It's reduced now to probably 50-50, so only 50% of your clinicians are burned out. And I think one would argue that maybe some people are retired. So the data is like you've exited certain people. So a lot of people left in the pandemic, or people have quit or found something else to do. And I do think also generationally that the current generation isn't going to tolerate and put up with this. And they have a much greater focus on balanced and other parts of their lives also being well, that they may or may not really um I guess attest or be aware of that to the point where they'll make decisions to try to reduce the symptoms of burnout potentially. So I do think things will change, and whether it's by personal choice or whether it's some of the efforts of our well-being officers and programs now being put in place for mental health support and access actually being provided. It seems unfathomable and unimaginable that in an industry where it's really, hard and the pace is quite fast and there's a lot of external pressures, that the stigma continues with any access to mental health, and the stigma still continues for not toughing things out. That's, I think, overall changing. I think because of the chief wellness officers and the interests related to that.
Interesting. I think, like I said, I mean, you mentioned 50-50. Even I think everyone goes through like periods of it's just kind of like a gradient. You operate on highs and lows of it. And you kind of have to be self aware on like how much you're on each side. Um, what are some of the symptoms? Because burnout is very popular in marketing. Either I'm not as audience aware as you are, so I don't know this like the stat exactly. But the it's very common in marketing too because it seems like what brings it out is this idea of that there's like endless things to do. You're in a sea. There's endless patients to serve. There's endless content to put out. It's like a blue ocean in terms of how much stuff there is to do, and then our
Is.
brains just like can't process it. Um, so with healthcare leaders, marketers, whoever's in the audience, like what are some of the symptoms of burnout that kind of manifest themselves? And maybe if they recognize it, they can, take corrective action. But what does burnout look like day to day, and how does it feel? You had to
Yeah.
explain it.
Yeah, so the first thing with burnout is like it's mostly a workplace attributed phenomenon, right? So burnout is not a psychiatric diagnosis, and it's not like depression or anxiety. Those are totally different. Burnout can happen to anyone. And I would argue that everyone's burnout is unique. Unique to their personal circumstance. I mean, I burned out 2 times in my clinical career, primarily because I love to do too many things. And so some people burn out because of the electronic medical record. Some people will burn out because they have physical medical illnesses in themselves and their family members, and they're actually also a caregiver at home. So they actually have 2 jobs. So that's why they burn out. So people's first, I would say that one is emotional exhaustion, meaning that when you get a new client or you get a new person to be able to take care of, it's not like, oh yay, let's be curious and find out what's going on and just be excited to do the work. The first thing you have is dread. Oh no, it's like this kind of a client or this kind of a patient. And then you're not excited. I mean, so the first thing, a sign is that you're just not excited. The second is that you also don't feel like you're appreciated or anything you do is not good enough and it's really not worthy of anyone. And honestly, it's a thing you tell yourself in your head. It's really not reality at all. And so I would say those are probably the 2 most common things. And I think the third one, of course, is just, feeling physically exhausted, in terms from a mental capacity, like you're just not even wanting to do the work. And I think that's the worst and the final sign. But I think people can relate to the first 2 pretty easily, and so I think the 2 out of 3 sort of components of burnout, as soon as you start to have one kinda get stronger, it's probably time to take a break because it is easy to fix if you recognize it early and can find the dose of what's needed to replenish yourself in time before you let it get out of hand. Well, the people who let it get out of hand are continue to be the ones who actually always feel like a martyr, where you just have to keep on shouldering through, not sharing in community like you've talked about, being with others, talking with other friends and colleagues, professionals, not finding a coach, not having a place or, either whether it's therapy or some other outlet like sports, to be able to find meaning or reality that no, I am worth more than just the output product that I'm doing. My RVUs for like the healthcare world, that like the amount of volume of patients you see and money you make, you are more than that. And so something just takes a reset to kind of be reality check. When you're too involved into the work and the output and the necessities that come no matter who you are. Because like you and I both know, in the business world, being a founder and, being in software tech development, like no matter what industry, there is some degree of burnout. And it's not unique just to healthcare. And I think that's the funny thing I notice as studying burnout and trying to find ways for people to go forward. That we're not alone. Like every industry has its own version of it. And it's a matter of for everyone to just to be able to recognize and find healthy ways, like the mindfulness, to be able to get through in a more sustainable way rather than just kind of powering through.
Yeah, that's so good. I think what a lot of people don't realize too is, I mean, I think entrepreneurship forces it, but the recognition of the stakes attached to like fixing this problem, like traditionally it's looked at as like, hey, I'm feeling low energy. I can get through it. It's just something it'll pass. Whereas if it was looked at like it's looked at like a traditional medical symptom, it's like, okay, we need to get you to the doctor. We need to assess what's going on here because especially in entrepreneurship, it's like when you are a leader, then the side effects manifest on other people too. It's like
Yeah.
you're kind of leading the charge and it's on you to bring the energy, bring the direction. And when you aren't in your right headspace and you're not bringing that to the table, it's a shortcoming on your end. It's your responsibility to fix it. So I think the mindset around it is really important. And to your point, some of the antidotes community you mentioned, I think this is a great segue. Like what is it about community to you? I know you have a community of healthcare professionals and leaders. What led you to wanting to start that? Was it this burnout problem? Was it a bigger reason? Or what led you to pursue community as part of your business?
Yeah, so I really think community, the reality is we are not alone. Well, we feel alone 90% of the time. And I think, you would argue that the last Surgeon General who wrote Vivek Murthy, talks quite a bit about this, about belonging and feeling as though you're included. And all of us are just, in this modern day and age, we're all running around with ad hoc diverse groups that, leaders, it's really hard to find diversity that can actually begin to relate to each other. So we have a problem where diversity is necessary in the workforce because we want differences of opinions and ideas. And so we need that in our companies. But at the same time, sometimes you just want to find a place where you can relax and like, let your hair down and sort of not have to explain things, right? Like so whether you're a black woman or whether you're an Asian American or whether you're a white male, something you just sometimes just don't need to want to have to explain anything. And you don't want to have diversity and you just want to relax a little bit. So obviously for healthcare, um, it's nice to actually have a place where you don't have to explain to somebody. This is why we, with transforming, a lot of people have had coaches offered by EAPs previously, the employee assistance programs, and like they're non-medical. So then you're stuck explaining what happens in the hospital and they can't really relate to understand what's actually happening in your life. And so just not having to explain some things and also to know that you're not the only person feeling those feelings is really important. So
Yeah,
it's, I think,
that is.
combination of two of those things.
Yeah, that's so important. I think a lot of people, it's like one of those things that you don't realize until you experience it. It's like when you, like what I'm going through right now. I have terrible hip mobility, and there wasn't a like point where I'm like, oh man, like this is. It wasn't like it was just slowly happens over time, and the same is
Yeah.
true with burnout and needing people around you that are that can help you identify that in yourself and take corrective action. Um, but also just like accountability has been a big one too, because especially with communities that you invest in, you put the time in, whether you invest in either financially or you put your own time into, it is absolutely essential. And it's the odds that you show up as a better version of yourself, get the most out of it, and really learn from the people in there are far higher. Um, so I think community increasingly is going to be a huge thing in the future, just in terms of the value in an online world. And I think to your point too, COVID is what made us realize a lot of that. Um, so I'm thrilled that I also know that it's not easy. Everyone wants to be in a community, but no one wants to be the one that like facilitates it and starts it. We're all kind of like looking around and like it's like the Spider-Man meme pointing at each other. Um, but so yeah, I commend you for doing that and taking that step because it is I mean it's a chosen battle, much like entrepreneurship. So I commend you for that.
It's kind of interesting too. A lot of people also, I think, when in the pandemic, we all found a bunch of things on Facebook. But as we all know, we don't Facebook has become an echo chamber to some degree, and also there's a lot of people who troll. So I think, I mean, I'm in many, frighteningly many communities. Most of them are on Circle, the software platform, but both Circle and Mighty and other different places where you can host communities. It's. I think we're all just looking for people with similar interests, and I think it gives us a place where we can begin to learn and do different things. And so for me, I have to admit, exiting out of the pandemic, I didn't want to leave that virtual space. If anything, both being on LinkedIn and, being in a virtual space helps you see that there's a lot more than just where you are. So I think it does make you feel a lot less alone because a lot of times, unfortunately, we do feel really alone, even in our own local
Yeah,
areas.
yeah, that's so true. I mean, I'm in several communities as well. And what do you think? Maybe this is something we can like resonate on, but like, what do you think is the difference between the communities that thrive? Because I even in my own mind, I can rank the ones that I'm in terms of like what was the highest ROI or the ones I've gotten the most out of, and they're not always just in terms of like business results or good potential connections. It's just like how I feel when I'm in there. So what do you think separates a good community? Obviously, activity is a big one. Engagement, being alive, and having like common threads of discussion. But what do you think are the main things that differentiate a good community from one that kind of falters?
Well, I have to admit, so I'm also speaking from someone who did have a a paid longitudinal community that wasn't able to sustain itself, and then also a free, just I'll just do a little bit of programming. There's a way to come closer towards some of our different webinars and book clubs that we offer. So I have a free community for healthcare professionals, and I am in several other ones. So I am probably not the best in terms of creating the community yet, because like you said, it does take a lot of work on terms of the founders. But what really makes the community are actually the people who decide to join and the people who actually contribute. And so I think what's always amazing to me, so I am in many other ones, and I always want to contribute because it's really important to just be an active member, to help that place grow, because you do get, just like everything else in life, you get what you put into it. And I think that's the reality. A lot of people go find
Yeah.
community because they think, I'll just get, a network or a free ride, or like maybe make a business deal. But in the end, the reality is you're only going to get out of it like what you put into it and what you are seeing. Because I just think even of the one person I met in was one particular community, I will refer all business to him because he was willing to go on a 1 hour conversation and helping me design a webinar and like a program. No, no, no ask, no nothing. And it's like the long haul. So now, like anytime if I ever think of someone, I will always refer, to him. So I think the reality is when we give first, then the rest will follow. And so that's why I decided, you know what, I'm going to just make the community free. It won't have a specified outcome. I'll have another paid one with a tighter container that's going to be like really about, so in the fall we're launching the Leadership Learning Lab, which is really going to be about the communication skills and challenges that leaders face, because often we're managing people, we're trying to give feedback, we're dealing with like differences between ourselves and differences with perspectives, and it's just hard to find the words, it's hard to find the mindset to be able to come to it with neutrality, right? Especially when you're sort of triggered by others, in the workplace in general. And so trying to find those leadership skills really isn't going to happen except with the contact sport of life. But it'd be really great to have a container where you could practice all those words with other colleagues who get it. And so it's really it's a very curated group. And so I think that kind of community will be very different from my free one, which is we're going to offer some book clubs and come get to meet us and get to know us. And I think that's really good enough. And I know lots of people with free communities that are pretty successful because really it's just about around a shared interest. We all love, I don't know, birds or cats or whatever. You can all just sort of vibe on that.
Yeah, dude, you said so many of the things that I repeat often. You get out of it what you put into it. And like so much of that I resonate with, I think, and going first was the other one, proactively going first and, without an incentive or need. That's what makes people remember you and attribute value to you. I think, man, so many things. The community as like a top of funnel offering, like we're struggling. Communities are just so hard because I think the best ones get like really almost not. I don't like the word luck, but a lot of communities get lucky in the beginning to have such a tight knit group of people with similar interests and
Right.
problems, and then
Right.
that spurs on its own growth because within even a niche audience, you have people at different stages of their journey, and it's really hard to serve them all well with one transformation or one value prop. Like for marketers, for example, there's job seekers and there's graduates, there's job seekers, there's people looking to make a career transition, and there's CMOs, and there's people looking to retire and make an exit. There's like all these phases in the customer journey. So hard to make something out of the gate that is valuable. Excuse me, is valuable to everyone. So I think like a top of funnel like free community is basically a more valuable version of what free content is. It's a way to scale one to one in a way that you couldn't with just a podcast in and of itself. So um, yeah, I love that you're doing that. And if you can't tell, I'm thinking about a lot of this stuff too. So I'm learning learning by osmosis for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. It's one of those things where I think attention is really hard to gather.
Mm,
And I think at the same time, the reality is, and I think I've heard you on other episodes that you've had, like it's really about playing the long game, right? I think when we allow that to happen, like your identity, like I'm just talking to the healthcare people, like your identity as a nurse or a doctor isn't going to go away. So the question is, your identity as an entrepreneur is not going to go away. Your identity potentially maybe as a marketer may not go away. And so I think the question is, what do you want to do and what accept just what is the next growth journey you need right now, and then to just experiment and see, and then see what happens. And the bigger thing I think a lot of people have commented on with me is like, I'm willing to just try it and then try to get some learning from it and just move on, because that's the only way that you'll know. And honestly, if you're lucky, you get successful and you go up a very linear career path, great. So you've learned to nail that, and don't be ashamed of that. There's no reason why, whether you want to like ascend the ladder into corporate, or you want to do more meandering away and maybe do a little side gig work on the, freelancing on the side, plus also corporate work. I mean, life is sort of like an oyster. Like, you have more options than you realize. I think, no matter where you are, right? You could be a new grad, or you can be older. I do think having both people in the group is really useful, because there's so much to learn off of each other. I think it's again, I think it's in people's heads if they don't realize that. Because I think there's lots of people like me, 20 years in, who are really learning from 20-year-olds. Like, oh, you've just expanded my mind, like my horizons.
Yeah.
Is like, oh, we can just do this. I'm like, okay, sounds good. We can just do this. Meanwhile, then for the older, giving back to the younger generation, it's like, well, for you to really actually be able to get to the next job, you're going to have other things in your portfolio. If you don't have those, you're just never going to get there. So how are you going to find the very next step first? Then the rest will follow.
Yeah, that's so good, because it's like within a like traditionally like communities are supposed to promise a transformation or outcome, and inherent in that promise is a black and white version of success and failure, right?
Yeah.
And we forget, when you build a community around one deliverable or one promise, that success and failure looks different to everybody, right? So success for someone that comes in could be, the college graduate, or the 20 something who's getting into healthcare for the first time and just meeting people ahead of them. Whereas for the older person, it's avoiding the loneliness problem, So um, I think a community built around solving those things, but also not being discriminatory towards just one of them, is a good mindset and model to have. Um, so
Yeah.
that's amazing.
Yeah.
Uh,
But it's not easy. It's definitely not easy.
yeah, well, it never is. That's what I mean. None of this is entrepreneurship, career, you know, stressful jobs. I mean, even there's probably people too who get out of a stressful career like that, and they lose a lot of like what made them operate beforehand. They found purpose in that. So it's part of it is, like I said, connecting with other people and learning and sharing the stories, and then that way you don't feel crazy for experiencing the emotions that you do. Um, but yeah, it's an endless topic that I'm endlessly fascinated about, and I think um, that's a great place to land the plane, like right there. I mean, what? First of all, I wanted to say thank you for coming on. Like, I was really looking forward to chatting today after listening to a couple episodes of your show. You are a professional in every sense of the word, and you've taught me a lot in the couple times that we've chatted that I couldn't have learned just by osmosis. So I really appreciate that. Having these conversations like reinforces the idea to me that we're in. It makes me grateful that we're in this industry too. That we made the decision to only serve healthcare, and that we resonate on this level. So I really appreciate that. And for the listeners, like if they want to listen to any other podcasts, if they are a healthcare marketer, where should they go to learn more about you and see more of what you got going on?
Yeah, so my website is transforminghealthcarecoaching.com. You'll find me there and on LinkedIn. And of course, my podcast by the same name, Transforming Healthcare Coaching. And I think I would say that for anyone out there who's in healthcare and just trying to figure out like where to grow, how to kind of fit everything together, it is really helpful to have an individual coach, or we also offer systemic team coaching. So I know for a lot of healthcare businesses and practices, it's really about aligning and finding shared mission and values, uh, especially when you have acquisitions and mergers and times of change. And I would say that probably in healthcare, we're always in a time of change. And so if you're looking for a group to come alongside you and shepherd, and so you don't feel so alone. So I think that's the funniest thing about coaching, is that you don't feel so alone. It can be very private and confidential, and you'll get what you'll put into the experience as well, especially for those who have larger group practices and companies serving many sites, because once you have many sites, there's more variability. And then it's about trying to make sure that the brand and the consistency stays the same. And so having systemic team coaching is really helpful in those instances.